Hello, the purpose of this screencast is twofold. First, you're going to take notes on indentured servitude or indentured servants, which is looked at as the root of slavery. So it's what was happening in the colonies before slavery started. You're also going to get a review of how to set up your notes page. Also, this is a screencast, so if the speed that I'm moving at is too fast, you can always pause. But please, listen to the entire screencast. Don't just advance ahead for the notes. This is your notes page. It looks a lot like this is how it's set up. So I'd encourage you right now to open up to your newest notes page. Remember, we take notes on the right side. So if you're facing your notebook, your right side. The left side is for journals. And it's broken down like this. Here's where you're going to put your topic. This is where you're taking all your notes from the presentation. So you're leaving the need to knows or the Q column blank. You're leaving the summary blank. We'll do this in class. You're taking notes in the notes section. Here you can actually fill in your topic if you like. It's called indentured servants. And we set up our notes in this fashion. So this is how I lay them out in the actual presentation as well. But headings have uppercase Roman numerals, uppercase letters, and you'll notice it's about a finger length over is subheadings. Then you go another finger length over and you have details. And also notice between, we go from 1 to 2, but the A starts over, and the lowercase a starts over when you go to a new heading. You probably will use 2 notes pages to take the notes today. And I break down the notes and actually provide you with the Roman numerals and the uppercase letters and lowercase letters to help you out. All right, when we get back into class, we're going to watch a short video on indentured servitude so we can review it. So push and pull factors. This is the first heading. And this picture here shows a line of indentured servants, and most of them are in chains for some reason, which maybe we'll find out, and they're getting onto a boat. So we can assume this is probably over in England. And I'm looking at this might be the Thames River in London. So these are people bound for America. So a push factor pushes a person out of his or her home country. So these people here are being pushed out of their country for some reason. Maybe we'll find out what it is. So a cause. So Europe in the early 1600s was in what was called the 30 Years' War. So poor economy, years of war, and many people without work and or in debt. So they owed money. So you got a lot of people after this war that are without a job and they don't have a lot of money. So what's the effect of all this? Well, Europeans in need of work look to the colonies as a place for opportunities. So this is all throughout Europe, but if we're focusing on the colonies, it's going to be mainly English immigrants that are coming into the Americas or coming to the colonies. Pull factor. This pulls a person to a new place to live. So these people here are being pulled to the colonies, which, Massachusetts, Virginia, just to name a few, Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, those are all the colonies at this time. But in the early 1600s, it was really just Virginia and Jamestown. And these people are being pulled to the colonies. And they're being pulled by cash crops. So tobacco and rice created a high demand for labor in the southern colonies. They needed people to work in the fields, in the tobacco and rice fields, to pick these because they didn't have machines back then. You had to have human labor do it. So these people bound for the Americas are probably bound for Virginia, more than likely in the early 1600s, and they're going to go work in tobacco and rice fields. Roman numeral 2, so heading 2 is indentured servant. And we see in the picture here, this woman is going to serve as an indentured servant to this gentleman. She's probably just arrived with all these people from Europe, and she's found out who her master is going to be. So this is the person who is going to be telling her what to do and providing her with labor or work to do. So uppercase A. So a indentured servant worked 4 to 7 years. And when they worked, they exchanged that work for free passage to the colony. So they didn't need to pay for their boat ticket. And lodging, meaning they got a room and a place to live in. Food, so they received food. and freedom dues. So this woman got free passage to the colonies, and in exchange, she was going to work, but in addition to the free passage, she's going to get lodging from the master, so a place to live. He's going to provide her with food, and then she's going to get this thing called freedom dues, which we'll talk about in a sec. So freedom dues is at the end of the service, the former servant received land, food, guns, a cow, and clothing, and this is so they could start their life. So really, for 4 to 7 years, they were just a laborer who was unpaid. And then at the end of their service, they received these freedom dues. But all along, they were getting lodging and food. Life was hard and restrictive, meaning they didn't have many rights. There weren't really many protections in place for indentured servants, but had some rights or protections against poor treatment. So they were not enslaved people. They were not slaves. They were not treated that poorly. They had some rights, and mainly against really harsh treatment, like you couldn't be beaten, for example. And uppercase D, indentured servitude was the preferred method for labor from about 1607, which is when Jamestown was founded, to 1680. So we're getting closer to the 1700s here of the colonial period. So this is when the United States hasn't even formed yet. It's when it is where places like Virginia are still English colonies under English rule, like we talked about leading up to the Revolutionary War. All right, the headright system. And you can see here is an indentured servant working. These are probably more indentured servants, and they're working in tobacco fields. So this is what the tobacco plant looks like. It was a huge cash crop, very popular in Europe. And this looks a lot like Jamestown, kind of the way that I can see that the looks a lot like the river, the James River and the riverbed. And so more than likely this is Jamestown. So headright system. For every indentured servant brought over from Europe, the planter requesting help receives 50 acres of land. So let's say that this guy right here on top of the cart is the boss man. He owns this land. He owns all these crops. This is his home. And he requests this indentured servant and this woman as an indentured servant. For each one of them that arrived from Europe, he got 50 acres of land. So pretty good deal. So they get work and the promise of the freedom dues, and he gets labor and land. Problem. So there's a problem here. Economic survival of the colonies depended on labor to work the land. So when England got these colonies in what would become the United States, they needed to turn the soil over and produce something like tobacco, like rice. Later it was cotton, in order to make it worthwhile to have colonies there. This is how they made their money. But there weren't enough people to grow things. So they had developed this headright system to get people to come over. So the problem is you need people there for the economic survival of the colonies. And the solution is this headright system, because it encouraged immigration to the British colonies in North America. It got a system in place where both the master and the laborer somewhat get what they want. So the beginnings of slavery. And this image is from Jamestown. These are the 19 Africans that arrived on a Dutch or Portuguese boat. I think most sources say it was Dutch. And they didn't quite know what to do with them when they arrived, because you can imagine that at that time, there wasn't many. This is the first Africans to touch that soil at the time in what we now call the United States. So we have our new topic, Roman numeral 4, the beginnings of slavery. Eventually, I'll show you a video that goes with this. So A, first Africans come to Jamestown, Virginia colony in 1619. So that is 12 years after its founding. Am I doing the math right there? Yeah. And they were treated like, IS means indentured servants, they were treated like indentured servants. In other words, same opportunities for freedom and rights as white indentured servants. The idea is that these Africans, even though they were African, they still were going to be promised the freedom dues and given lodging and given food, just like any white. indentured servant. They were being treated the same. However, first slave laws removed freedoms and rights, and we have evidence of this because in Massachusetts in 1641 and Virginia in 1661, there is documented evidence that African enslaved people were being bought and sold as property. So quickly, what went from being indentured servants turned into a system of enslavement. So Roman numeral 5, problems with and solution to indentured servitude. This is after something called Bacon's Rebellion. And a large class of former indentured servants start getting upset because they're always being given rotten land. They can't grow anything on it. So remember how those freedom dues give them land? Well, they're not happy with the land they're getting, and they're kind of perpetually poor. So they rebel. So problems. Only 40% survived. So of all the indentured servants, only 40% survived. So that means 6 out of 10 died before even fulfilling their contract, mainly from disease, because there wasn't modern medicine at the time, or malnourishment. So it was really tough living. So it wasn't a very reliable source of labor if 6 out of every 10 people are dying that come over before they even fulfill their 5 or 7 year contract. B, by 1660, there was an upset class of former indentured servants. So these are people that did fulfill their contract. They did receive a little bit of land, a cow, a gun, and they found that the land they were getting was really bad, and they were becoming upset. So, and this was becoming a class, and you could think of it as a lower class, people that didn't make much money because they were former indentured servants. So the land received as a freedom due was poor. They couldn't grow crops on it. They couldn't make their own money. So they were in a state of total poverty. So they're upset. And they want to, because they're upset, they want to maybe fight back or find a reason, find those that are responsible for their poor condition. So land was also, the land that they received, former indentured servants, for their freedom due, was way out west, closer to the mountains. Virginia's got a mountain range that runs through it. And oftentimes, because they were far away from the fort or from the city itself, Jamestown, they were on native land. And so the Native Americans that lived in the region, the Powhatan, were attacking them because they were invading native land. So they had to kind of deal with native attacks, and they didn't like that, these former indentured servants. So the system's bad because most are dying, and they're upset by the fact that their freedom dues really aren't worth it. And they demand better land. And here is Bacon's Rebellion. They actually burned down Fort James in demanding they want better land. And so this battle, this is a whole class of people try to attack the fort and invade it. And they're these former indentured servants that are angry at the fact their freedom dues didn't give them enough. So problems with and solution to indentured servitude. I use the word solution loosely because the solution is American slavery. And that's not really a solution at all. It's more it replaces indentured servitude simply because of the greed of the slave owner or the person who owned the enslaved. So here we have a picture of either the master, or this could be somebody that worked for him, a supervisor, and these enslaved people look like they're picking sugar cane. And then this looks like some type of punishments being administered. So the solution is enslaved Africans are preferred by landowners and planters. So instead of having to have to deal with this, with giving land over to indentured servants, and most of them are dying anyway, this system of enslavement of Africans seems to work better. It was more profitable because it didn't cost them much. They just had to purchase the enslaved person. Once the person was enslaved, they had to keep them alive with lodging and food, but it wasn't as expensive as then having to have to give them land, etc., like they did for indentured servants. And it was a renewable source of labor. The enslaved had families of their own. Children were born, and those were future enslaved people. Okay, when we get back to class, we are going to make sure that you have all these notes recorded, and then together we'll be doing the need to knows and the summary. Thanks for listening.